Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Leading Seaman Boatswain's Mate Matthew Reary from HMAS Perth 3. Today marks the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Sunda Strait and the sinking of HMAS Perth 1 and USS Houston. The bell that you have just heard being struck was recovered from the wreckage of HMAS Perth 1. The Perth was discovered in 1967 by Australian diver David Birchall. The bell was not part of this recovery. In 1975, the bell had been recovered by an independent Indonesian salvage company. Birchall immediately travelled to Indonesia and was able to negotiate the transfer of the bell to the Australian Embassy. A small ceremony was held at the Embassy to mark the occasion before it was shipped to Australia and into the care of the Royal Australian Navy. The Navy donated the bell to the Australian War Memorial in a ceremony in 1976 that was attended by Birchall and surviving HMAS Perth veterans. After 33 years spent at the bottom of the ocean, the bell has been carefully conserved by memorial curators and can be seen on permanent display here in our Second World War galleries. Joining us today to commemorate this significant anniversary are the Right Honourable David Carter, Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Parliament of New Zealand, and His Excellency Mr Chris Seed, High Commissioner, New Zealand High Commission. The Honourable Jane Prentice, Assistant Minister for Social Services and Disability Services. Commodore Michelle Miller, Director General, Navy People and former Commanding Officer of HMAS Perth 3 on behalf of the Chief of Navy of Australia. Chief Warrant Officer Rafael Chavez, Naval Attaché, Embassy of the United States of America. Mr Peter Everly, President, ACT Branch, Returned and Services League of Australia. Mr Russell Pettis, National President of the Naval Association of Australia. Commander Steve Ewell, National Executive, HMAS Perth Association, and the family and friends of those who served in HMAS Perth 1. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During the ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From South Australia, Prescott College Southern, Morphett Vale, and from Victoria, Haileybury College, Keysborough. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catafalque Party attention! Catafalque Party present arms!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is birth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catafalque Party shoulder arms!
Children, please be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to the lectern.
Today, we pause here to commemorate the 75th anniversary of one of the most significant events, not only in the history of the Royal Australian Navy, but of our nation itself. On this day, 75 years ago, in 1942, the Australian light cruiser HMAS Perth was sunk in the Battle of the Sunda Strait with the loss of more than 350 members of her crew. On the 28th of February, HMAS Perth and the heavy cruiser USS Houston were making for the southern coast of Java after the fall of Singapore only 2 weeks earlier. Perth and Houston were the only large Allied ships to have survived the Battle of the Java Sea the day before. They had retreated to Tanjong Priok, where they arrived on this day 75 years ago. The two ships attempted to resupply, but fuel shortages meant that Perth took on only half of her normal fuel capacity, and a lack of shells left the cruisers with what little ammunition was left over from the battle the previous day. Perth, Houston and the Dutch destroyer Everston had been ordered to sail for Jilajup via the Sunda Strait. Late that evening on the 28th, they encountered the Japanese Western Invasion Convoy at the northern entrance to the Sunda Strait. The convoy was escorted by a large Japanese flotilla of 2 light cruisers, 8 destroyers and a mine layer, supported by another 4 cruisers, an aircraft carrier and further destroyers. Heavily outnumbered, soon running low on ammunition and changing course constantly to avoid attacks from every direction, the Australian and American crews fought desperately against impossible odds. Together, Perth and Houston sank a Japanese transport and a minesweeper, then severely damaged a further 3 transports. But under the immense weight of Japanese numbers and superior firepower, the end was inevitable. Japanese ships launched 85 torpedoes during the brief engagement. Perth suffered her first hit from a Japanese shell at 11:26 p.m. At midnight, with ammunition running low, displaying immense courage and strength of character, one of our nation's Navy's greats, Perth's captain Heck Waller ordered his ship to try to force a way through. Soon after midnight, the first torpedo struck. With her crew reduced to firing practice shells and illumination star shells, a second torpedo hit Perth shortly afterwards. Captain Waller then ordered abandon ship. Perth was hit with 2 more torpedoes, finally sinking at 25 minutes after midnight on the 1st of March. The action was all but over in just under an hour from the time that the first round had struck. Although ablaze from enemy fire, USS Houston continued to fight on. She was rent by shell and torpedo explosions and sank just 20 minutes later. The captains of both vessels went down with their ships. Of the 686 men on board HMAS Perth, more than half, over 350 officers and ratings, perished in this, her last action. Of the 320 survivors captured by the Japanese, 1/3 died during their long ordeal as prisoners of war. Of the more than 1,000 American officers and men aboard USS Houston, less than 400 escaped their sinking ship. Only 266 of those survived the harsh regime, brutality and starvation in Japanese prisoner of war camps. Together we remember the brave seamen of both vessels, as well as those of the other Allied warships, Australian, British, American and Dutch sailors, who were lost in the series of engagements in the Java Sea, while attempting to repel the large Japanese invasion forces. Tonight we will tell the story of just one of these brave Australian sailors who gave their lives for us, for our freedoms, in what was the most desperate year in our nation's history.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who gave their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we pay tribute to able seaman Ernest John Atkins, who was killed on active service with the Royal Australian Navy during the Second World War. Born in Melbourne on the 19th of December 1916, Ernest John Atkins was the son of Ernest and Vera Atkins. Educated at Melbourne Grammar, Atkins was a promising sportsman. As an amateur footballer, he won the A-grade Best and Fairest with Old Melbanians and represented the Victorian amateurs. He joined the Melbourne Football Club in the Victorian Football League for the 1940 season and played 4 games for Melbourne before enlisting in the Royal Australian Navy Reserves on the 26th of August 1940. He commenced training at HMAS Cerberus and continued his sporting pursuits, becoming the Navy quarter-mile champion. In 1941, Atkins served with HMAS Hobart in the Mediterranean, but was recalled to Australia to commence officer training. However, with Japan's entry into the war in early December 1914, Atkins was instead posted to HMAS Perth, which sailed for the Netherlands East Indies in February 1942. On the 27th and the 28th of February, Perth was amongst a force of Australian, British, Dutch and American ships that fought in the major naval battle for the Java Sea. 5 of the 14 Allied ships that took part in the action against the formidable Japanese force were lost. HMAS Perth and HMAS Houston were lucky to survive. They were able to break off from the engagement and make for Tanjung Priok to refuel. The following night, HMAS Perth and USS Houston made for the southern coast of Java through the Sunda Strait. En route, they encountered a large Japanese invasion force heading for Java. In the ensuing battle for the Sunda Strait, the heavily outnumbered Perth and Houston were sunk. 353 members of Perth's crew, including able seaman Ernest John Atkins, were killed as a result of the action. Almost a third of the survivors died as prisoners of the Japanese at the war's end. At the war's end in 1945, only 218 returned home to Australia. Ernest Atkins is commemorated in the Plymouth Naval Memorial in Britain, which is dedicated to the thousands of British and Commonwealth sailors which lost their lives at sea or who have no known grave. His name, along with names of the members of HMAS Perth who died during the conflict, is listed here on the Roll of Honour to my left, among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. He appears in the photograph displayed today beside the pool of reflection, along with his shipmates in 1941. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember able seaman Ernest John Atkins, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea, no flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, avast on the ocean bed. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
At a folk party presents arms.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Had a folk party outwards. Turn. Had a folk party quick. March.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.